This week, after we have celebrated the abundance of the blessings on that Thanksgiving table, I want us to examine the blessings that God promises for his people. Good morning. This is Pastor Ernie Lewis of the Blue Point Church in Sisney, Illinois, with your thoughts for Thursday. When Moses received the law of God, he rehearsed it before all the people of Israel. And not only did God give them directions for their lives in order to be able to live for him, but he promised a multitude of blessings for those who would obediently follow him. He says in Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verse 1, "Now it shall come to pass, if you diligently obey the voice of the Lord your God, to observe carefully all his commandments, which I command you today, that the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations of the earth. And all these blessings that shall come upon you and overtake you because you obey the voice of the Lord your God." I think we must preface these blessings with the conditions that God has presented here. If you diligently obey the voice of the Lord your God. I mean, this is certainly a condition, right? I mean, it's a condition today for us. If we're going to follow the Lord and receive his blessings, we must be willing to listening. And listening to God is one thing, but diligently obeying his voice is so much more. First, there is a diligence in listening. We must know his marching orders before we head off and sometimes do what we think he wants, when really we're just following our own will. And the call to diligently obey is not to pick and choose some things that we think we can handle and leave off the rest of the list in God's will for us. Moses calls for God's people to obey and observe carefully all his commandments. We know this included a long list, but this is what God knew was best for his people and for their lives. And he still has our best interest in mind today. Carefully obey these commandments. And the blessing for Israel was, God will set you high above all the nations of the earth. Israel was already blessed because they were God's chosen people. He had used them to show how an all-powerful God provides for his own, whether by manna or miraculous deliverance, God had worked in their lives. Now, God has chosen to bless the entire nation. But don't forget, they were commanded to diligently hear his voice and diligently observe the commands he has given them. By the way, there are several other promises. He also promises that these blessings will come upon you and overtake you. It's almost like God will bless us in such an overwhelming way we'll never be able to understand and receive it. Certainly, we have to be thankful for all of that. His blessings are spelled out in the coming verses. He will bless them as they live in the city. He will bless them as they live in the country. He will bless the fruit of their body, which reminds us of Abraham, who became such a great nation, even though he didn't really see that mostly during his lifetime, but he trusted in God's promises. The produce of your family, certainly the increase of your herds and your flocks. When God blesses it, he pours out everything. He says, blessed will be your basket and your kneading bowl. In other words, God will provide your meals and all that you need. He will cause the enemies who rise up against you to be defeated in battle. Mostly, the Lord will establish you, he says, as a holy people unto himself. Isn't it amazing and wonderful to think that God wants us to be his people, but he certainly wants us to listen and obey all that he gives us to as the orders for our lives.